No, pero no sé si.
Welcome to the world this week. I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. This week, Iran, a week that changes the world perhaps forever. With us to discuss this incredibly historic week is Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst and a briefer of presidents, and Patrick Lawrence, former East Asia editor of the International Herald Tribune, author and columnist for Consortium News. Hello, Ray and Patrick. Thanks for joining us this week.
Pleasure. Pleasure, Joe.
Ray, I want to talk to you. We're going to talk broadly about the implications of this war and what it means for the future of the region and the entire world. And that's not an exaggeration to say the whole world is being affected. But I want to begin with some news today, which is the not the actual leak of the report, but three officials who are familiar with the report who spoke to the Washington Post. And it came from the office of Tulsi Gabbard, the National Intelligence Council, and they reported, excuse me, they reported that a week before Trump started this war on February 28th, this war of aggression, this unprovoked war against Iran, that this council, the National Intelligence Council, concluded that a full-scale major U.S. war would unlikely topple the Iranian government. Ray, what is your reaction to this report? What is the significance of this?
Joe, the significance is simply that this is good news and very bad news. Good news is there are still people telling the truth at the CIA. Ironically enough, under great pressure, the whole business about the Zionist lobby, not only in the media but in the White House, really wants to portray Iran both as a nuclear almost power and the chief sponsor of terrorism throughout the world. Now, the CIA has resisted on both counts, and they came up with this memo. I think we can believe the New York Times for once. I think this is real. And if you need any further evidence, where is Tulsi? Uh, I sent out a little tweet yesterday saying reward $100,000 for information leading to the apprehension of Tulsi Gabbard, who's been held incommunicado. Somebody's going to do a little milk carton thing. Have you seen Tulsi Gabbard today? And Joe, this is funny, but I got 100,000. 100,000 looks at two things on Tulsi. I have only 90,000 followers for God's sake. So, between the two of them, people are really interested in this. And this news from the Times, of course, the good news is they're telling you the truth. The bad news is that Trump is going off. He's not well. I mean, I've been saying that for 3 or 4 months. He's not well. And the implications of that, not only for what's going on in the Middle East, but for Russia and China as they look at this man and what he might do, those are really serious. And my major worry has to do with the possible use of nuclear weapons.
We're going to get into that, but I wonder if this is not exactly depending on papers, but it's came out a week after a war began, not years after it. What impact could it have? They're not really saying anything, the administration, is it? Are they about this?
Well, the good news again is that somebody leaked it. And I don't think it was the CIA this time. It was probably somebody working for Tulsi saying, well, she still lives. We don't know
Hmm.
where she is, but she's working remotely, but she still lives. And we told the president the truth. Now, why would they want to do that? Not so much out of personal loyalty to Tulsi, but because they know how this is going to go down. I mean, the military, if there are any kind of sensible military officers at the top ranks, they know how it's going to go down too. And the notion that the U.S. will be able to win this one or even escape with few wounds is really crazy because, in my view, the Iranians have already begun to win, and we're just what, 1 week and a half day into this. So lots can change, but that's my calculus here. People like to go on record. If they can't do it before the war, at least as soon after the war as they can. These people thought they should, partly out of devotion to Tulsi Gabbard and the National Intelligence Council, which can do good things and has done good things in the past, but mostly just to sort of say, look, we told you so. Nobody likes to be told, we told you so. But we told you so, or you told Trump so. A week. Now, that's when the thing was produced. They must have been telling Trump that for a full month at least before that paper was put out.
Just a moment, Patrick. It's obviously people who were arguing to Trump not to do this, and now they're getting themselves more or less on the record, not with their names, but saying it's out there. We warned you, so this disaster is not on us. What is the National Intelligence Council? And has it been around before her office started?
Well, the good news about the National Intelligence Council is something that I alluded to in past programs. After the debacle on Iraq, where my former colleagues participated in a charade painting Saddam Hussein as having weapons of mass destruction and the likelihood that he would give them to Al-Qaeda, 75% of the American people believed that before Al-Qaeda. Well, they had just knocked down all those buildings in New York and in the Pentagon. So the situation was very different then. In any case, they had that war. It was done on false pretenses. The head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, after a 5-year investigation by his committee, issued a bipartisan report that said the intelligence used to justify this attack was uncorroborated, unsubstantiated, or even non-existent. Reflect on that. Non-existent intelligence. Okay, so what happened? The reason I go into all this is because that's the background. Somebody says, oh, they're going to do Iran next. My God, no. Real men go to Iran. That's what the neoconservatives would think. So somebody said, let's get a real, honest estimate on Iran nuclear. And they looked all over. They couldn't find anybody in the CIA who could be depended upon to do an honest estimate. So they went to the State Department, got this fellow, Tom Finger, formerly head of the State Intelligence and Research. That's their intelligence arm. They twisted his arm, reassured him he'd have his own people to come in and do this, give him a whole year to do it. He did it in secret, and in November 2007 issued a key judgment in a new national intelligence estimate, which read, we assess that Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. We say that unanimously, and we say that with high confidence. Now, let me brag just 1 second. That stopped the war, okay? And if you read George W. Bush's memoirs, which we analysts have to do, okay, on one page he must have written himself, he says, this was a terrible surprise because, quote, how could I justify attacking the nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. So he wrote that in his book. That was it. Cheney and he were ready to go out into the sunset. Long story short, that 207,000 estimate, which referred to 2003 as to when they stopped, with the fatwa from the recently deceased supreme leader, held. I was surprised as hell. It held through all the gyrations until 2025, exactly a year ago, when the threat briefing required by Congress, Tulsi Gabbard, under oath, said precisely the same thing. She said, people are starting to talk about this now, but we have no evidence that they restarted the nuclear weapons program, and that would require the supreme leader to go back on his fatwa. So I'll leave it there. But my notion here is that, well, your question was about the National Intelligence Council. That's what Tom Finger came in and chaired. And just as another lousy footnote. The Director of National Intelligence asked Chaz Freeman to come and be the chair of the National Intelligence, I think 2009, okay? And Chaz, ambassador, deputy secretary, I mean, he was going to take he didn't even have to be confirmed. He was taking a lowly position, and he said to this admiral who he knew real well, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And guess how long he was in place? 6 hours in that position, because the Israel lobby came in and said, no, no, you can't have this guy. And his patron, Admiral McConnell, went to Obama and said, "Oh God, what are we going to do now?" And Obama said, "Well, get rid of him. Of course, get rid of him." You know, signs of the times. But that's what happened to Chaz Freeman. Had they allowed him to do that job that Tom Finger had done on other areas, we would have been not in the trouble that we're in today.
If I'm not mistaken, you gave not the Finger, but the Sam Adams Award. Is that right?
We did.
Yeah.
We gave it to, well, actually, not to Chaz, but oh yeah, to
No,
Tom Finger
Finger.
we did. Yeah, Finger. He was teaching at Oxford, and we went over there and
Yeah.
said, "Would you join us?" And he said, with some reluctance, because he didn't want to be put in the same boat as Julian Assange or
Right.
Chelsea Manning, but he
Uh-huh.
agreed to do it.
Oh.
And, let me just add one little thing here. He was a great guy, right? Now he's out at Stanford, where they're not such great guys. So when 51 intelligence officers retired and wrote this stupid, fictitious, fallacious letter right before the election in 2020, I guess it was, okay? I look at the damn list. I knew half of these guys. I worked for some of them, and my God, there's Tom's
No.
signature. Yeah, so I
Oh.
beat him with a quick, Tom, did somebody forge your signature? No, I'm just so upset at the fact that Trump might win. My God. The quintessential intelligence officer is not immune to Trump derangement syndrome. Let me leave it at that.
So he
That's a
he
horrible
admitted to you
story.
that
That is a really horrible story.
he admitted
So
to
yeah,
you, Ray, that he admitted to you that he didn't really believe that this was about the Hunter Biden laptop, I believe, right? That it was
that was,
Russian
yeah.
intelligence or
It
something.
was,
He
it
didn't
had
really believe it.
had
Yeah.
all the earmarks of a Russian intelligence
Right,
system.
right. So now
Yeah.
you need to give him the finger rather than an award to Mr. Finger. But I want to say this before I go to Patrick. I know you're chomping at the bit to get your 2 cents, and we really want it. I just want to say that those were the quaint old days, Ray, when a president listened to intelligence, even George W. Bush. But can't hit Iran because this NIE says they're not making a bomb. Those days are long gone now. I don't think, obviously, the Trumps that are in charge now give a damn what the intelligence say. As Trump said on the record on the plane, who cares what Tulsi Gabbard says? Patrick Lawrence, weigh in
Yeah,
on this, please.
uh, I want you two to help me out by way of this document. I can see that it's quite important. We haven't seen the document, but the accounts indicate it's very important, as you said, Joe. But I'm a little confused. For days and days before we learned this, we were hearing about disquiet at the Pentagon, um, denied but evident. The Wash Post had a piece, I think it was Tuesday, with the striking quotation, the mood, this is verbatim, the mood at the Pentagon is intense and paranoid, right? So we knew there was, I'll stay with disquiet, dissent, whatever, disagreement. We knew that. And it seems to me now, maybe I have this wrong, but it seems to me now that it's just now in writing, right? It's just now documented. And it leads me to me, it goes to a larger question. Who is actually making these decisions? If if warnings and distress were expressed at the level of the National Intelligence Council. And this was a week before the uh, operation began. We are forced to, on the question of why did it go ahead and who's running this? And you know, that leads us to a couple of other points. Number one, I think this is an Israeli operation. You know, the decisions are being made in in Netanyahu's office, right? I think, um, and you know, number two, what is the extent of Donald Trump's authority? I read over and over again now that this is Trump's war, and why did Trump decide to do this, and so on. This sort of thing is stated 50 different ways. I'm not sure Trump is making any of these decisions. You know, I go back to his first term, April of 2017. He wanted some troops moved out of Syria, and he was roundly disobeyed. I think he wanted troops to go from Syria to, no, he wanted them out altogether. And eventually they moved them across the border to Iraq, right? Okay, so Trump was stuck. And that was when he began making what I call his my generals speeches, right? My generals, I've told my generals, right, etc. Okay. And at that point in April 17, he said, I've decided to give my generals full autonomy to make policy decisions in the field. That's because they just made one, right? And so Trump has been chasing the fire engine ever since, if you ask me. And what we have now is a man who I actually stand with those who either think or suspect that Trump actually didn't want this war, right? Uh, uh, Running around pretending that he's in charge of it. So, you know, these are the questions that this document raises for me. And I'd like to hear from one or another or both of you. I get the importance of the document, but doesn't it just document what we already knew, that there was dissent within the upper ranks of the military and the intelligence community?
I'd like Ray to answer that, but I just want to quickly say, but it specifically said that a regime change would not work. I think that's really the significance here, even a major full-scale war.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the way that the hierarchy is arranged, the military don't have a lot of clout within the National Intelligence Council. In other words, they're just one element of the National Intelligence Council. There are, I think, now 17 or so intelligence agencies that are represented on that. So I think we can talk about a difference between the analysts, hopefully the sons and grandsons are the ones that did that national intelligence estimate in 2007, okay? Looking at all this stuff, getting some of the reporting from Witkoff and the son-in-law, and then listening to what the Omani foreign minister said after he mediated. I mean, he mediated the last talks on the 26th of February, got right on a plane, came to Washington to to brief the vice president, and then went on with Margaret Brennan, for God's sake. We're this close to a deal. And the Iranians, says this Omani mediator, they've made all kinds of arrangements and concessions on processing of uranium, and they're willing to accept, hey, U.S. inspectors maybe. So this guy was elated, right? And what happens? A couple hours later, Trump authorizes this war. So dissent, of course, there's dissent of people who know which end is up on these things, and then the people like Rubio and like Hexeth, you know, and like maybe Vance. So they had Trump's ear for the last couple of hours, and he decided to just let it be like it was last time. Gross deception, pretend that there were no concessions to be had by the Iranians in these talks with Witkoff, and lie through his teeth and use those negotiations uh, as a deception as he did before, and just go ahead. I don't know how much we can parse this any deeper. We know, as I said, I know that Trump is not well. Who's auto penning him? I mean, he's not well. Neither was Biden. Who's running the show? I just don't know. But I know that the pro-war group, namely Rubio, who said something really stupid, in effect, we did this for Israel. Israel, whether that's true or not, I think it probably is. So those people are in charge right now, and the president seems to be thinking that they might win. And the big culprit, in my view, is the senior military generals, the officers, who are like automatons. They just sit there and say, yes, sir. Can we do this? Of course we can do this. Yeah, there might be some problems. And then this could become so ridiculous that some of them leak to the New York Times and say, no, it's crazy. No, no, don't blame us. Well, we can blame them all now. They're a bunch of shysters is what I call them, especially Witkoff and the son-in-law, to let themselves be involved in this duplicitous game.
Are all 17 agencies represented on the National Intelligence Council, Ray?
That's my understanding. In other words, it is the supreme interagency assessment group. It used to be the Office of National Estimates, and then it was something else, okay? But the way things shaked out, we have the National Intelligence Director, and how did that come about? That superstructure? Well, that became that came about because of 9/11. Maybe this is an illustrative story. The 9/11 Commission knew damn well that George Tenet, who was not only the head of the CIA, but was director of Central Intelligence, meaning that he had authority over all those 16 intelligence agencies at the time. And he could bang them together and say, well, what is your assessment here if this or that and the other thing? And he didn't. And so the byword in Washington is, well, no one's in control. George did his best, but he wasn't in control. He wasn't in control because they're scared shitless about Dick Cheney and what he might do to George Tenet if he didn't bend to George Tenet. But what Cheney? Okay, so what happened? I'm sitting when the 9/11 report comes out. Okay, I was asked by the BBC, I think, to be in their green room to comment on it as soon as it came out. So I get the book. Okay, it's announced in the afternoon. I go to the index and I see what they say about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. We can get into that later. But the point is, I'm sitting next to Senator Slade Gorton from the state of Washington. Okay. And he's one of the members of the 9/11 Commission. So I said, Senator Gorton, what's all this business about nobody's in control? Tenet was in control, and he was too fearful of Cheney and Bush to tell him the truth. For God's sake, how can you bring in this the new superstructure? And he looked at me and he says, "We know that, McGovern. We know that, Mr. McGovern. But we have to be seen to be doing something. And so, yeah, we'll set up this other structure so that this people really in control." Well, it was all so unnecessary and so mischievous because when you have another superstructure, just as when you have a new Homeland Security taking stuff from with the Coast Guard for the FBI, for God's sake, you have bureaucratic uh, fuzziness so that nobody is held accountable. Fingers are pointed various way, and you can get away with murder, which is exactly what's being done now.
How do they reach consensus if there are 17 different voices there?
Well, that's where Tom Finger comes in. You get a Tom Finger in there, and he beats them, and he says, "Look, if you don't agree with this, that's fine. We would like you to have a footnote in this, just as you do with the National Intelligence Estimates. Give me the footnote by tomorrow evening. We're putting it out on Thursday, something like that. So it all depends on people, I'm afraid. And the people in the 9/11 Commission and the stupid people that thought they should have a new superstructure, I mean,
Yeah.
it could be used for good. Tulsi Gabbard has on occasion used it for good, but it was unnecessary. And I can tell you another story, but I won't right now.
So in other words, dissenting voices would be relegated to a footnote. But this at
Well,
least,
yeah,
yeah,
but
go on.
I mean, sure. I mean, you have to come up with, I mean, hopefully somebody in the White House asked for this, okay? And if they didn't, that wouldn't surprise me, but that'd be an awful shame. That has happened before. In Afghanistan, no national intelligence estimate was requested or allowed, okay? So hopefully it was requested. At least Tulsi Gabbard apparently said, okay, you go ahead and tell the truth. They told the truth. And as was pointed out, Trump said, I don't give a fig what she says. We're going to go ahead and do it. So yeah, dissent is allowed and encouraged, actually, in the best of
But this
circumstances.
was the full 17 that Hillary Clinton claimed was involved in assessing Russiagate when there were only three.
Yeah,
But
that was
even
Mueller.
the NSA wasn't highly confident even out of those three. So
Well,
this is
they
the
could have
whole
come up.
complement. Yeah.
Well, that was Brennan and the Clapper,
Well,
totally duplicitous people. They did it by themselves. Brennan with five people, and he came out with the desired answer. And you know the rest of the story, Joe, better than I do. Russiagate.
No, I don't know it better than you do, Ray. But anyway, well, I know it too well, and so does Patrick. So, Patrick, we're going to end this discussion of this intelligence stock, and it will do. What do you think, Patrick? It'll have no effect, right, on the conduct of the war. It's just to get it out there that there was opposition, as there was from General Kane, the Joint Chiefs of Staff chief, who said that we don't have the ammunition to do this war, right? And now he's snapping to attention now. What happened to his dissent?
you know, my mind goes back to something our dear friend John Pilger said in the early days of the Ukraine war, right? I have never seen a media blackout as extensive as this one, right? Uh, I wish he were still with us for lots of different reasons, but I wonder what he would say about this one. We have we are left to surmise, speculate, text and subtext, read between the lines and so forth. We can't really tell where this war is going and or anything else, or when the Pentagon will run out of this or that, because it's all so badly reported, if it's reported at all, right? Here comes my plug, Joe. The only place you can find credible material these days is in independent media, right? Um, uh, on the one side of things, I listened to Colonel McGregor, who reports that a number of American bases in the region have been, I think this is his word, destroyed.
Yeah,
Okay. They've moved personnel to hotels,
yeah.
which is pretty clever, right? Since
But they
it's
know where the hotels are.
and
I'm going to get
the
into that,
hotels have been bombed,
Patrick.
right?
We're going
Okay,
to get
so
into that after the next segment
yeah,
about
okay,
what's
so
happening.
and then you hear Colonel Wilkerson. He said the other day in a podcast that he had now the blackout in Israel is actually a matter of record. Okay, this curious moment when a CNN correspondent, on camera, mic in hand, uh, some kind of projectile landed behind her, and she turned to her colleague and said, "We can't say where that came from. The Israelis don't want us to say." So censorship in Israel is overt, right? A bit like the old Soviet Union, right? It's just right there, no denials, right? Um, and but Wilkerson Colonel Wilkerson said the other day he had seen, I think he said 30 minutes, 20 minutes of video indicating that Tel Aviv has been
Yeah.
very, very seriously, heavily damaged in repeated attacks,
Patrick,
which
let's
says a
hold
lot.
off on. I wanted to move on. I want to talk about that after we discuss the next topic.
Okay,
Go into
so
depth
all
about
I,
what. Yeah.
yeah, all I'm saying is now we can't, in answer to your question, where do I think the war is going? I have to be honest. I don't think we can tell.
Yeah. We
Um,
didn't get into where the war is going yet. That's what I want to do. But I first want to talk about Donald Trump's state of mind because Ray gave me a good segue there. He says he's not well. And I think that we're talking about a man who's absolutely out of his mind right now.
Okay, let me return to my earlier point. I don't
Yeah.
think it's up to Donald Trump where
Right.
this goes from here on out. No less than Lydia Polgreen on the Times opinion page, that radical columnist, right,
Yeah.
uh, wrote the other day, Donald Trump is basically a spectator in his own administration.
Hmm.
I like the thought. I like the phrase. And she's since then not the only one to use it. Um, so that's my take on Donald Trump and what he's going to do. Madness, we discussed this before we went on air. I don't know whether it's madness or stupidity, rank stupidity.
Yeah.
But and as I said to you before we went on air, they're not self-canceling. So I'm just putting another idea side by side with yours.
Well, let me read just the three quotes from Trump today. Today, Saturday. He writes, these are from Truth Social or to reporters on Air Force One, about the schoolgirls who were killed on the very first, in the opening hours of this war. They killed the Ayatollah and then they bombed this school. The other day, Reuters reported that U.S. military investigators have finally admitted that it was the U.S. that
Yeah.
hit this school, not Israel. And so today, Trump writes, or he said, I'm not sure whether he wrote this or said this, but in my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran. We think it was done by Iran because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. Hegseth
Yeah.
is still saying we're investigating. Then he said, then he talked about Prime Minister Starmer of Britain, and who was sending two aircraft carriers after as the Canadian and the Australian and all the other vassal states of the U.S. began by saying this is questionable the legality of this war. Now they're all inching towards getting involved. So Storm is sending two aircraft carriers. He's thinking about it. He's giving serious thought, rather, to sending the aircraft carriers, but they're not going to take part in offensive operations. Trump writes, we don't need them. Okay, Prime Minister Starmer, we don't need them any longer. But we will remember. We don't need people that join wars after we've already won. And then the last thing is, he said this morning, which I think this is the most chilling and sick thing of all. Today, Iran will be hit very hard under serious consideration for complete destruction and certain death because of Iran's bad behavior. Are areas and groups of people that were not considered for targeting up until this moment in time. Ray, what kind of a mind is this to make threats like that against groups of people and talk about complete destruction and certain death?
It's a mind of a deranged narcissist. Uh, it's a mind of somebody who never had to pay a price for mistakes, uh, who surrounds himself with people who act like sycophants and allies that act like vassals. Um, I don't know how you correct this, except um, unlike Patrick, it seems, I believe that it's just a matter of another week or two before the U.S. runs out of ammunition, and that the Iranians are almost certain to prevail unless a nuclear weapon is contemplated and threatened and perhaps even used in extremis.
Patrick, we're going to get into that. What about the state of mind of Trump? What do you make of? You say, is he stupid or mad? We are discussing that. Where do you come down?
Yeah,
Well, you know, they're not
let's not split hairs on that on the adjectives. Look, you're getting this from Hegseth in spades, right? Hegseth is even worse than Trump. He says the most savage things, right? Um, uh, what I'm getting out of it the last little while listening to this stuff, I just had to write about it all a few hours ago, right? I'm starting to think if if the Americans were in the dominant position they profess, they wouldn't have to speak like this hour after hour, day after day. It's a bit, there's a little Lady Macbeth going on here, okay? And to me, the psychological tumble in this is, to me, it suggests very strongly the opposite of what it is supposed to uh, persuade people of, right? It causes me to think that what one hears from people like the two colonels and so forth is probably closer to the truth, right? That the American position in this is not strong and shows little promise of getting stronger. That's how I read it.
Well, that's a very important insight, Patrick, that if you're winning, really winning, you don't need to say we're winning, and you don't
You
need
just keep on winning.
right. Exactly.
I agree. I agree.
So what is your assessment? Let's talk about the issue of the American bases, for example, and then we're going to talk about Israel damage. But I understand now from what I learned last night that the U.S. has not been using any of the bases on the Gulf Arab countries, the Gulf state countries. For example, Iran is hitting in Kuwait and the UAE and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, etc. But those countries had said publicly that the U.S. could not use their bases on their land to strike Iran. By the way, the Washington Post reported that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince and the effective leader of Saudi Arabia, was on the phone to Trump all the time, ensuring that he attacked Iran. So he was playing a double game. I don't know about the other Gulf leaders. But Iran has responded by striking them. Apparently, the U.S. has not used those bases. But the Iranian argument is that you are on the U.S. side. You are hosting them, and their mere presence there makes a legitimate target. And that led to the president of Iran, Progression Today, making an apology to those Gulf states, saying that, we're sorry we hit you. We're only attacking the U.S. bases. And he got pushed back on by people in his own government. He had to kind of turn around and say something different. What do you make of that apology, Ray? And are these bases going to stay there forever? Because it's now clear to these Gulf Arabs that the Americans have not fulfilled their end of the bargain. A bargain that goes back to Roosevelt on a boat in Suez with the king of Saudi Arabia saying, you give us the oil, we're going to protect you. And they did not protect these countries. So there's talk now of disinvestment of the Gulf Arabs from the U.S. And there's this letter that I read with Scott Riddle last night from a billionaire there questioning Trump. Did you do this on your own? Was this Netanyahu? How dare you make this decision to drag us into this war? So there's real anger amongst the Gulf Arabs against the U.S. What is your reaction to this, Ray, about the bases and how much destruction has there really been there? Do we really know? And what is the future of U.S. on those bases in the Gulf region?
Well, Joe, as you know, I and most of us are kind of dependent on the real experts. Now, Colonel McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson, Major Ritter, Captain McGovern of the U.S. Army is less immersed in this. Okay, now also Chaz Freeman, who had our interview today. Now, Chaz has been around for a long time. He knows the other side of this, the diplomatic side. I am convinced that those U.S. bases in the Gulf states are gone and gone forever. Many of them
Really?
have been obliterated, pardon the word, okay? And more cleverly, The radars that on which the fighter bombers and on which so much else depends, four of them have also been taken down, as they say in the military. It seems that the momentum that started with all these great attacks has slowed. The targets that they have now are probably not the prime targets, and they probably don't know where many of the most sophisticated missiles are buried, okay? So, in my view, just sucking and gleaning all this information from people who know a lot more about this area than I do, I think the bases are gone. The financial and economic consequences are immense. They are already with the strait being closed. And it just it boggles the mind to think that Trump was so poorly informed, if indeed he was the prime mover, or at least in reaction to what Netanyahu wanted, boggles the mind that they didn't think about these things, you know. Uh, these big things, you mentioned some of these big things, strategic planning, okay? Well, as a second lieutenant U.S. Army, we never did a damn thing without making, sounds corny now, an estimate of the situation. What was that? You find out where the army is, where your opposing army, you find out how many there are, you find out how well equipped they are, you find out what support they have in their populations, and then not least, locks. Now, not the salmon and locks you get in New York, okay? This is LOCC, okay? Lines of communication and supply. Huh? Okay. Now, did those generals go to infantry school like I did, for God's sake? I mean, it's so clear, not only on this particular Iran problem, but many others, that all these things, if you weigh them together and you think out the relevant benefit to the United States as opposed to the benefit for Israel, you say, forget about it. This is crazy. We're not going to get involved in that. Besides, if we do, we're out of ammunition. It says, so, Joe, as you know, that's why I was very confident just 12 days ago. Trump is crazy, but he would never do all this because look what would happen. Straight would be close and all this stuff. Well, he did anyway. Going back to the point, whether he's insane or not, I suppose that applies.
I promise not to ask you to make a prediction, any predictions, Ray. Don't worry about that.
Joe, may I put
Okay,
in
yes,
one,
Patrick. Yes, Patrick.
just one small detail, the import of it you can tell me about. I saw something on X today, not the most reliable forum, but I saw a report saying that an F-35 took off from somewhere or other uh, en route to Iran on a mission and forgot to turn off its transponder. And so its entire flight path across Saudi Arabia was recorded.
Mm.
And we have committed not to uh, overfly Saudi Arabia at Riyadh's request. So it just a little something to suggest, as I said before, we don't know everything. And let's go back to Rumsfeld. There's what we don't know and what we don't know, or whatever he said, right? Uh, the bases, whether the Americans were using those bases or not, I don't know, right? We have to be careful with what we know and what we can only surmise. Anyway, a little something.
That's a very good little nugget you gave us right there, because I don't know what to believe either. Because I was reading an NPR story, as mainstream as you can get, about this statement by the Iranian president of apology for attacking the Gulf countries, and that he was saying we're only going to hit the bases, right? And then NPR just says, without attribution, the U.S. has not been using the bases to attack Iran. I said, what? So then I go look it up, and Grok, of course, which is completely aggregates the mainstream viewpoint. So you push back, as I've done, and I've gotten Grok to change its mind on Russiagate, on the coup in Ukraine, and then and ultimately he admits, you're right. I faced with these facts. I said, well, you're interesting. You able to change your mind? And he said, well, I'm not human, so I don't have the emotional attachment to these things that most people humans argue their point. But then it turns out that you're telling me that they flew across
This
Saudi
is what I
Arabia.
saw. There
So
was
there
a
you
map
go.
of the flight path and everything else, but who X, it's look,
Apparently,
I watched,
all the bombing came from ships, according to the mainstream
I
reporting.
defer to Ray. If the bases are destroyed, then that's that. If, as Ray put it, they're not there, right? Okay, but if they're there, I have a hard time imagining whatever in hell they told the Gulf states. I have a hard time imagining they're not using them to the full extent that they need to.
Why
We're
are they
not going to
there?
use these.
Yeah.
We need these bases, but we're not going to use them because the Emirates would.
No, I
It doesn't.
agree. And what Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, said today, in my view, is a sort of a deft sort of appeal to the Gulf state leaders. Look, you thought thought you could depend on the U.S. for defending you. You can't anymore. So we're willing not to re-destroy all those U.S. bases in your country. And we're just willing to have a little ceasefire on that end of the thing if, in the final analysis, you agree in the longer term never to allow this to happen again, having been taught this terrible lesson that the U.S., after all, can't defend you, and we'll tie that up now by striking whatever is left of the U.S. prisons, and not just the hotels, but what lingers with the radar and the airfields and so forth. So I think so. Now Peshkashian was subjected to all kinds of criticism, but I'm convinced that he had the approval of that triumvirate that is running Iran now. And in my view, if they get a ceasefire, so to speak, up in that end of the woods, then they can concentrate on defeating Israel and the U.S. Throughout the rest of Iran.
Why would you have bases there that cost billions, if not trillion or more dollars in all these countries if when a war actually breaks out on this scale, they're not used?
Then you
Why
can't
would you
use.
have these bases?
Well, if the radar is knocked out, you can't use them.
Right. No, but the
No.
question is, where is it being used before the radar was knocked out?
Oh yeah, well that was for defend these countries, and these countries have now been given this bitter lesson that if they expected the U.S. to protect them, well, there are some Patriot missiles on the way. They'll be here in about 3 weeks. Well, it's too late. They can't protect them. So, in my view, this is a pretty deft diplomatic thing that was approved by the head of
Yeah.
the three heads of Iran, and that it might pacify things on that front and buy some goodwill in the long run with the Gulf states.
This might be a product of Iran having responded really quickly to the initial attack. So that may have come from ships. So they quickly started hitting these American bases, taking them out of action. So that maybe that's why the U.S. bases haven't participated in the attack on Iran, because they were taken out very quickly by the Iranians. I don't know. That's one possibility.
Could be. Mhm.
Patrick, I thought you were going to say something.
Just deferring to Ray's thesis, I just want to say it's absolutely remarkable that these bases could be out of commission, and we're not. And it's buried under, it's swept. This is what I mean by a blackout rivaling uh, good old John Pilger's observation about Ukraine, right? It's really quite comprehensive, right? And to quote Caitlin Johnstone in an old column she wrote years ago, Americans tend to think that if there were a news blackout, she was actually talking about propaganda, but she said, if Americans tend to think that if there were a news blackout, they would read about it in the New York Times, right?
Yes, that's right. So, let's talk about Israel then. You mentioned before, Patrick, that I didn't know about that. The CNN reporter was on live and admitted, well, we can't go over there because we're not allowed to. I mean, one day, maybe when the smoke clears, we'll see the destruction. George Galloway reported that a friend of his who lives in Tel Aviv told him that when he went outside, that it looked like Gaza, that area of Tel Aviv. That's what Galloway said. So we have
This
no
is
idea
what
what's going on.
Wilkerson, this is what Colonel Wilkerson was saying, and he
Yeah.
based it on, with the Israelis will let nothing out, but Colonel Wilkerson said he saw 20 or 30 minutes of video attesting to this. I mean, okay, the news outlets, the print and broadcast, all right, they're officially censored. It's not a secret. It's policy, right? But amateurs obviously will have hours and hours of
Yes.
video footage, and some of it's probably getting around.
But if you put that on the internet, you might be subject to that law where you could be arrested and pay $5,000 fine or shekel fine, whatever it is, or go to jail. So I don't know if
Yeah,
I think social media users would be subject to that as well.
probably it is, but people get things out, right? I have faith in these guys, the two colonels and Chaz, of course.
mm,
He says he saw it,
yeah, I could tell you this.
but
I'm
but I
glued
think
to,
my larger point, Joe,
yeah,
forgive me. I
yeah,
think my larger point is this is what we are reliant upon now
yes.
in Israel, but not only in Israel. What happened to those, the base, etc. Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm relying, unfortunately, on mainstream media and others too, with their live updates. And one of them is Haaretz, and I keep looking at it. And literally every 10 minutes or so, you get sirens going off in Galilee, sirens going off in the Negev, sirens in Tel
Is that
Aviv.
right?
And then you don't hear anything else. We never hear an update about what happened.
Yeah.
Incoming
Yeah.
Iranian missiles. That's what they're reporting, but you never hear anything about whether they struck, whether they were taken down. They don't even say that the Patriots took them out or whatnot. They just
The,
hear
the,
about the alarms, and then you never hear about the result of these
no,
alarms. What's going on?
there was one of these silly news reports I read. I think it was one of these live update things in the Times, right? They're purporting to report on events in Israel, and the sentence was, and the Israeli authorities reported identifying incoming drones on two different occasions. End of it. That's it.
Yep, that's what we
For
know.
all
So
the times, for all the Times tells us they're still incoming,
they're
right?
still in the air, right? They're suspended in midair. But the Iranians are shooting a hell of a lot of stuff at Israel, I could tell you, and some of it's landing. And Ray, that takes me to the question of the missile war and the drone war and the race between the interceptors from the US and Israeli side and the supply of ballistic and drone missiles on the side of Iran. Whoever runs out first might lose this war. And right now, we don't know. It's still going on, and the U.S. is saying that there are fewer barrages of both drones and missiles coming from Iran. That doesn't necessarily mean they have fewer of them. That's the way they're trying to portray it. But right now, if they ran at the THAAD, by the way, the THAAD interceptors apparently were reliant on those very expensive billion-dollar radars that have been destroyed on these in these Gulf
Right.
states. So maybe the THAADs are not working at all to protect the Arab countries. So where do we stand now, Ray? We're in the dark, as Patrick is very wisely pointing out here. We really don't know about a lot of things here, and one of them is being the actual supply of the interceptors and then the missiles that Iran really has. Last June, in the 12-day war, the Israel begged the United States to end it because they were running out of. And this is from the Wall Street Journal, not independent or media. It's the Wall Street Journal said that the U.S. had to stop this war because they ran out. The U.S. went through 1/3 of all of its THAAD missiles then. And in fact, in January last month, Israel apparently stopped the U.S. from starting this war because they hadn't replenished. So where do we stand, Ray? Do you have any idea, or you're in the dark as much as anyone else about the stocks on both sides?
Well, I think there are some straws in the wind. Uh, our president has said we have unlimited supply of everything. Everything we have, just everything we need. And so, given the president's record, I believe one can assume he's lying and that he's saying that because he likes to lie, okay? The other thing is that there are people who know how many missiles are produced every year and all this kind of stuff. And they know that there are only a discrete number of Patriots or these other missiles that have been made available. They're taking some of them now from Japan and South Korea, for God's sake. So, how long it's going to last? I mean, from all the things that I've read from reputable people, and in a negative way from what the president said, in other words, interpret just the opposite, okay? We're going to run out of missiles first. We're going to do that, and it's going to be awfully bloody. What's going to happen to Israel? Okay, Israel's going to run out of this dome, this black dome or gray dome or
Iron
whatever.
Dome, Iron Dome.
Iron Dome. Yeah, well, we're going to have a technical. No, we're going to have a golden dome, silver dome, and in the U.S. silver dome.
Gold.
Silver.
Trump wouldn't
Yeah,
have anything less than gold. Come on.
gold. Yeah, that's what it is. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so this dome didn't work in July of last year, right? No, it didn't work. After the Iranians got the Israelis to use up a lot of their anti-air missiles, they they threw the real stuff at them, and they got through. Patriot missiles didn't work either. And every time you fire a drone, much less a missile, into Israel, they use 3 or 4 of these things, sometimes as many as 15 to get one missile. So they're going to run out. Now, what does this mean? If I'm right, and I'm depending on people that you mentioned, the colonels, Scott Ritter, and people who have watched the flow or the production rates of these essential weapons. If I'm right, Israel's going to be really obliterated this time, not Iran, but Israel, which is what, 1/15 the size of Iran. So what does that mean? Well, that's where I start really worrying, Joe and Patrick. My God. This guy, if he, Netanyahu, in extremis, he has a wild card. It would be truly wild. It's called a nuclear weapon or 2 or 3. And would he use that? Now, I would like somebody to persuade me that he wouldn't use that in extremis. Would Trump or maybe somebody more sensible try to dissuade him from using it? Well, yeah. Would he succeed? I don't think so. So this is what I'm focused on. In other words, unless somebody sensible can mediate this thing or put an end to it, maybe when we run out of missiles, okay, I think the Iranians will come to a deal where it's shown that we lost, but at least it can be disguised, as long as the Israelis don't reach this situation where Netanyahu want to do what Cy Hirsch once called the Samson option. So it's good and it's bad, but if you look at the Israeli point of view, I think they have bit off much more than they can chew. I think they saw an opportunity to bulldoze or get the president to go ahead now because there are several months before the midterms. And for some reason, I think they had this hubristic idea that the Iranians aren't really all ready for this and that this could be over in a week and we'll be sitting pretty and the president will win the bike. So it's all very unrealistic, but I think that must have been their calculus, and they persuaded Trump to go with Rubio and Hexeth rather than the more sensible people who probably have names, but I don't know the names of any that are actually advising the president. Tulsi Gabbard, maybe, if she could come out of her shelter.
Can I ask you a question, Ray?
Sure.
Drawing on your years of experience, right? Uh, all during or during many of the Cold War years, there were always back channel conversations, right? they never made it anywhere near the surface such that they would be reported. And then later on, when we read of them, it was at least when we became aware of these, it was something of a surprise. Really, all this time they had back channel communications, right? In order to keep things under control. What's your sense, given what you just said? What's your sense of the likelihood that there are back channel contacts, maybe through the Iranian mission at the UN or some embassy in Switzerland or whatever, what it, what's the thought?
Patrick, you raise a really good question. My inclination would be to say that the United States is trying desperately to initiate such dialogue through back channels. Now, the way they do that normally is to use CIA communication system, which is not available to anyone, they think, certainly not the State Department or other people. They don't want to mess into it, okay? Now, today, we have a direct line between Vladimir Putin and the president. Um, we did have sort of direct access through Witkoff to the foreign minister of Iran. That's over. I think the publicly the Ukrainians have made clear, look, don't talk to us anymore. You deceived us not once but twice. Okay, deceived me once. You know the expression. So I think that if things are going the way I think they are, and the colonels say they are, and I think there'll be a while before the Iranians even accept an overture that comes through a direct U.S. subliminal channel. What they might talk to is the Swedish ambassador or the Swiss ambassador or something like that and say, look, we're going to go up to this point, but don't expect the Americans, don't tell the Americans we're going to stop because we're not. Okay? Reassure them about that. So it's a good question, and it's really vital that there is this communication. Just tack on this note that the communication between Putin and Trump is also very essential. And I'm sure, morally sure, that Putin is using that weekly at least to say, dear friend Donald, look, we feel just as strongly about Iran as we do about Ukraine. So don't push us. We have a bad experience with dissidents and all kinds of terrorists coming up through our soft belly. It's a historical thing for us. Don't mess around here. Don't realize, please be aware that we have a mutual treaty with the Iranians. And he wouldn't say this, but our viewers need to know this. I am very surprised at Putin acting what I thought would be sort of precipitously, sort of out of character. And the first time I noticed that was 4 years ago when he concluded a treaty with North Korea. Treaty, big treaty schmeaty. This was a mutual defense treaty. Oh my God. Think of the implications of that, okay? And besides, what did he give North Korea? He gave them the Topol M intercontinental ballistic missile, which can reach any port of the United States, including Mar-a-Lago. Ted Postal saw it tested. It's there. So I'm thinking, well, that's not characteristic of Putin. We don't have the North Koreans help Putin in that crazy thing that the Ukrainians did into Kursk Oblast, okay? And and you know that there are Oryeshnik missiles in Belarus, okay? So guess what? Why is this all relevant? Putin wanted to have a mutual defense treaty with Iran, and they resisted it. It took 2.5 years to negotiate the treaty that you do have. December of the year before last, finished in January, and that turned out not to be a mutual defense treaty. In other words, Russia is not obligated to assist Iran if it's attacked. Now, what am I gleaning from that? I'm gleaning from that the Russians were really to go out on the same kind of limb that I never thought they would with respect to North Korea or with respect to Belarus. They wanted to have this kind of treaty, and it was the Ukraine, the Iranians that resisted. And so, what does that say? That says the Russians feel really, really strongly about protecting Iran and not letting it become a threat right on Russia's southern border. And the proof is in the pudding, or in the eating of the pudding, if you wish. They are sharing all kinds of satellite and other sophisticated uh, information with with
Yeah,
Iran. And when I asked a fellow Russian specialist, "What about that?" He said, "Well, what the U.S. and NATO are doing in Ukraine, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, do you know what karma means?" You know, that's it.
you
I
know,
mean,
Ray, my understanding of the um, documents between Tehran and Moscow was they stopped short of strategic alliance. They stopped short of the word alliance, right?
right,
Partnership. Right? That's
right,
okay. In diplomat, you know this. In diplomatic language, there's a difference by way of obligations. But
right.
I want to mention it was kind of a passing fashion for a couple of days this week. Maybe Joe noticed it in corporate media. Look at the Russians. Look at the Russians and the Chinese. They're not doing anything. What kind of friends are they? You know, the Times ran a couple of these pieces, the Wash Post, probably others, right? I read as much of this I read of much of this media as I can bear in a single day, right? But the fact of the matter is, you went right to it. They've been supplying extremely key technologies, targeting stuff, intelligence, et cetera, right? The Chinese are reportedly may have sent the Iranians a missile that is hypersonic and dodges all the detection devices the West could possibly come up with. So they're in it to a certain extent, to a considerable extent, I would say.
Yeah, I think the Chinese have a an intelligence collection ship in the area. And they too are said to have provided to the Iranians a very sophisticated air defense system that reaches out 800 kilometers into the ocean. And that's why our celebrated aircraft carriers, which are just big sitting ducks, have to stay not only 500
Yeah,
kilometers,
yeah, yeah.
750, 800 kilometers. Now, what that mean? That means the aircraft to fly off those things are on a one-way mission unless they're
Yeah.
refueled. Well, you're
Now,
going to refuel these things over Iran. So, the military, I talked about what we trained on doing a estimate of the situation. Well, I just can't conceive. Well, I can because these are all charlatans. They're all what's the word, sycophants that Trump put in as head of
yeah.
these services. And the guy that he had to take out of retirement, for God's sake, Raising Cane, he's an Air Force general. Air Force generals are the worst thing you can have as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Now, Ray, cast your mind back to the last day of September in 2015 when the Russians out of nowhere, well, out of nowhere so far as we in the West were concerned, flew their first sorties over Syria, right? The State Department's jaw was dropping, right? Nobody could quite believe it. Uh, you mentioned Russia's vulnerabilities on its southern borders. Understood, right? Uh, uh, do you see we've talked about technology supply and all the rest just now. Do you see a situation? I mean, how far do you think this will go if things become critical for the Iranians? Do you see the possibility of Russian air sorties or anything like that?
Well, Patrick, you're violating the rules now because Joe just promised he wouldn't ask me to predict anything. So, but I'll go ahead anyway.
I didn't ask him. Patrick didn't. No, I didn't ask you. Go ahead.
Okay. I remember it well. It was the last day of September 2015. Putin was at the UN. He has to have a
Was
little
he?
talk. Yeah, we talked to Obama. And he said, look, I just want to tell you, we don't want any trouble, but we don't really like these terrorists, these nice terrorists or the bad terrorists. We don't like them overthrowing the Assad regime in Syria. So we're going to start sorties. We're going to start them tomorrow. And just I want to let you know that. And ideally, would like John Kerry to work out with Lavrov, rules of engagement so we don't start bumping into each other there over Syria airspace. What do you think? Obama says, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I'll talk to John. Well, they talked, right? They talked for 11 months. They came to an agreement, which was mutually acceptable and closely monitored by Putin here and by Obama here. And what happened? Well, after 7 days, the U.S. Air Force bombed the hell out of more than 1,000 Syrian troops in
Yes,
places that
I remember. Yeah.
they have been for years, okay? And so what happened? Well, Lavrov says to my friend John Kerry, how do you explain this? And Kerry says, well, I don't have the final say in Washington. And finally, he admitted, he said, well, the military felt strongly about this. And so there goes your Air Force doing that. Do they have Obama's nihil obstat? I don't know.
The
But they went ahead and did
the
it. So this
the,
is
the
put on the record.
the fashionable term of the time. Remember, deconfliction, right?
And
Remember,
they successfully did. They had a joint place where they deconflicted all this stuff. So now, it's real sour now. I think Putin is a little bit surprised and really pissed off that he gave, for example, Witkoff so much time. 11 in the evening till 4 in the morning, working on these 28 points. And I don't think Witkoff's going to be seeing the door of the Kremlin anytime soon. And so I think I see Putin under some pressure now. Come on, Vlad. You know what these guys are like now. Are you going to still try to negotiate something with them? I think that's what he's hearing. On the other hand, people say, and a lot of my colleagues say, look, this Ukraine thing is going to be won on the ground. It's going to be won on a battlefield. Well, from the point of view of Russia, that ain't going to be enough. That ain't going to be sufficient because we have to prevent this from happening again. We need a new kind of architecture that will
yes, yes.
prevent people like the
But
whole spiel.
Ray, the question is how far they may go in the
Oh,
Iran case.
I don't think they're going to have to go very far. I think they've gone as far as they want to right now, supplying essential information.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think on this, the New York Times is probably correct. 'Cause that always happens all once upon a time. So yeah, I think they don't really need to do an awful lot. And if the Chinese are with them, let me just add one little factoid here. Well, it was the 1st of February. I remember it. Ali Larijani, okay, National Defense Advisor to the Supreme Leader in those days, okay, big guy, lots of history with the Revolutionary Guards and in diplomacy, and he goes up to Moscow, and he's very favorably received by his opposite numbers. And I said, well, that's normal. Oh, wait a second, there he is with Putin. 2 hours with Putin. Whoa, that's interesting. And oh, wait, now there are reports he went to the Chinese embassy. to talk to them for 2 hours. Oh, wow. Well, what does it mean? Larijani was the one that the Iranians, including the supreme leader, designated by name to take over if the supreme leader were assassinated. Okay? It's on the record. They have various people that were designated to take over. So Larijani has got his channels correct with Russia. He knows what to expect. He knows that the Russians did offer him a mutual defense treaty, which is a world of difference from what they got. And the Iranians are probably saying, oh God, we should have bought that one, but at least let's get the Russians in as deep as they can be. And again, Putin, I think, will be judicious, but he's not going to let Iran be obliterated or weaned away so that it's a protectorate of the
Yeah.
United States or NATO or anything like that.
Ray, you had to
Laurie,
wonder
Johnny,
whether you have to wonder whether Iran had a treaty with Russia, whether this war would have happened at all, whether the U.S. would
Amen.
have attacked.
These treaties mean a lot. Yeah. If South Korea attacked North Korea, Russia would be treaty bound to defend North Korea. That's what a mutual defense treaty is. Do we
yeah,
have
that's
one
a
with Israel?
strategic alliance.
So the Iranians, in their pride, made a mistake in not concluding that mutual defense pact with Russia, probably, right?
Speaking of
Oh,
Laurie Johnny, he gets a quotation of the week here. He gave a speech on state television today, and he said, "The Americans are stuck in the swamp of their own miscalculation."
Yeah.
Thought
You
that
would
was
like Larijani because he's written books about Immanuel Kant. Cathy,
yes, I gather.
you've been writing. No, what I said to you, Ray, was that the Iranians probably made a mistake because of their pride, perhaps, not concluding that treaty. That may have protected them. I
well, I
think.
agree. Yeah. And that's a biggie, you know.
Now, as far
And
as
I
that
think,
Chinese collection ship you're talking about, let's hope that Hexet doesn't have another torpedo with the name of that Chinese ship on it.
well, I found
Oh,
something out about Hexeth. You know those weights that he was
Yeah.
lifting. You see, okay, they made out of foam. Made out of foam.
Yeah, I
Those
agree. It's
big
always his
lightweight weights.
brain, by the way, I think.
Made out of foam. Yeah, it was brain. Okay, that's better
Max
still.
Blumenthal mentioned that possibility. Are
Oh,
we
did he?
certain of that now? We're
So
pretty
that's
certain of that.
independent confirmation.
Now, speaking of the Russians, I want to talk more now about the implications for the wider world here. Alexander Mercouris was saying just a couple of hours ago that he believes the Russians might be involved in trying to mediate between Iran and the Gulf states, cutting the Americans and Israelis out of this, just a mediation. Because Prigozhin, the president of Iran, was on the phone to Putin yesterday, I believe. So they talked about something, and that's just a speculation on his part. So they could play a role diplomatically as well in trying to patch that up, which would be important. And the Americans will be furious, of course. But the Gulf states are furious with the U.S. from whatever you can gather because they were left out there. They were left
Hmm.
out there. What's the point of these bases if you're not going to protect us? Um,
You know, the practice of statecraft that does not involve or pass through Washington is an important feature of this third decade of the 21st century, if you ask me, right? And this is what we're talking about now with the Russians, you know. Way back in the days of the JCPOA negotiations, Javad Zarif, an excellent diplomat, um, was pushing hard for, I think we might have mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, was pushing hard for a regional agreement whereby uh, conflicts in West Asia would be settled by agreed mechanisms that did not involve the United States, right? And I don't think that idea is dead, but I think it's out there as something that will gradually emerge. I don't know how, but who will bring it forward? But there is actually the Chinese example of when was it, 2023 or 4, 23? 23, when Wang Yi, another excellent diplomat, put the Saudis and the Iranians together in Beijing and emerged with the patched up, restored diplomatic relations.
What's happened to that?
Yeah, that's a
Oh,
curious question. I don't know.
MBS.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese are probably not happy about that. That
Yeah.
great effort that they made, which looked like so promising at the time, has literally gone up in
Yeah.
smoke right now. But I want to go back to the nuclear weaponry. I'm glad you raised
Let me
that
just,
because, yes,
Joe, let me just finish with I hadn't heard Alexander McCourse, for whom I
yes,
have a great deal of respect,
right.
but I think it was 3 days ago, Putin himself picked up the phone, took the initiative, and called every one of the leaders of these Gulf states. So
Uh,
in my frame of reference, that shows how how important the Russians feel about this, how they need to stay in touch with these folks, and to the degree that their diplomacy, together with the Chinese were trying to do way back when, could tamp this thing down, not only in this kind of venue, but ultimately as a as an arbiter, as an intermediary between the United States and Iran. Russia has, well, Trump says he's had excellent relations with Vladimir Putin. Well, they're not so excellent now, but there are relations, there are ties, there are communications. Okay, so it's not out of the, and there's been things in Russian public statements now. One in RT just three days ago, indicating that the Russians would be happy to serve as intermediaries when it comes necessary for somebody to do that. And the Russians have the heft, they have the ties, and they would be happy to do it given the stakes for Russia in this conflict.
The New York Times is doing whatever it can to poison those relations. As Patrick pointed out, there was this piece the other day, oh, ridiculing Russia. They're not doing anything to help the Iranians. Oh, and then the next day, oh my God, they're giving intelligence to the Iranians. The exact opposite. They go crazy now. So they're not going to want to see. But that's interesting, Ray, that he's speaking to the Gulf Arab leaders and to the Iranians, so that maybe there is something going on there. Now, there's two aspects of that I think, and I'd like you to comment on this. The one being the immediate threat to Russia, as you guys have implied already, the Caucasus being weak underbelly, as it's called, and the Americans worked with the Chechens, didn't they? They stirred all that up. They helped
oh yeah,
as a way.
yeah,
Following on Afghanistan and Brzezinski's admission that this was done to try to bring down the Soviet Union, they worked then through the Chechens. So that he can't let Iran fall. And if after the Second World War, as you remember, the Soviets occupied the northern part of Iran, right? And that was a big issue with the UN in the early days, getting the Soviets out of there. So this is clearly an important geostrategic place, but also BRICS as one of the members of BRICS now. So this is a front line between this global battle between a multipolar world, China and Russia leading it, and
yeah.
the U.S. empire. Let's hear Patrick on that. This is such a crucial battle. This is the battle of the age here.
Yeah, I think it's important we get into these details, what happened in Tel Aviv or Bahrain, quite important. But I think it's also important to step back and read this war in its larger context. And I read it as a very major confrontation between the West and non-West. I'm given to understand, well, some people make the argument that Iran was becoming too important in the BRICS arrangement. It took Americans, it took Washington, the policy cliques, years to wake up to the reality of the BRICS. And when they finally did, they didn't like what they saw. And the arguments made now that one objective of this operation is to blunt, or let's go with the famous word, obliterate Iran as a member for its place in the New World Order, BRICS, Belt and Road Initiative, and so on and so forth. This extraordinary corridor, transport corridor, starting in St. Petersburg and ending in Mumbai, right? Yeah, I think that's part of it. I want to make one other point in this same context. A colleague of mine years ago, before the Russian operation began in Ukraine, by 1 month, December of 2021, wrote a piece for us called saying Ukraine is NATO's Waterloo, right? I'm very proud of that piece. I didn't write it, but I published it. I think I might republish it at some point because it's going to prove true. And I'm wondering whether this moment is going to prove very decisive in the decline of the American imperium, a real turning point. I'll stay away from Waterloo, but in that direction, right? Uh, that's how I see this. That's how I see this whole thing. I mean, the spectacle of the Americans taking on, what are we going to call Iran? Do we still call it a developing nation, a middle income nation or something? Okay, taking on a non-Western nation, a non-nuclear non-Western nation, and not prevailing, in a trice. This is, it's seriously in danger of breaking its pick on this one, right? And I think I see it in very large terms in this way, a really decisive moment in the decline of the imperium.
I think the Greater America and Greater Israel projects are at stake right now.
I agree. I agree with Patrick, and I just add that you go back to when Nixon went to China and how that all shook out, to include the first strategic arms reductions treaties in Moscow, 72. I was there, okay? The Russians were really afraid that the Chinese would steal the march in improving relations with the United States, and that was half of their incentive. Okay, that worked. So in those days, as I like to point out, there was a triangular relationship. Okay, it was kind of uh, well, you say kind of a an equilateral triangle, if you remember your geography. Okay, Russia, China, the United States. Now it has become an isosceles triangle. Big arm here, China, big arm here, Russia, short end of the stick, so to speak, the United States. Now, in my view, Patrick is exactly right. The issue has been joined. And in my view, it's very, very unlikely that the U.S. will prevail or even emerge from this without a very, very bloody nose, and probably the end to what Trump can hope to accomplish in the world or in our country, because the midterms are going to come, and this is not going to redound to his benefit on those elections. So this big triangular thing is really big now. Isosceles is the word to remember because those two main arms are dwarfing the United States in significance, also in economic power, and also, look, I started working at the CIA in 1963 against the Russians, against the Soviet Union, okay? Because they were threatening us with their strategic arms, okay? And I headed the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch, and they were terrible. They were really gonna. Well, guess what now? For the first time in my lifetime, and that goes 86 years now, okay? For the first time, the Russians are more powerful than the United States armed forces, not only in conventional weaponry, hands down, but in strategic
Yeah,
deterrent.
yeah,
Stuff
yeah,
that
yeah.
goes under the South Pole, stuff that goes into I mean, deterrence is in place. It's more than deterrence, but as long as who can predict Trump? And so that's the problem. If I were Putin, or if I were briefing Putin, I think I'd try to take long vacations because trying to figure out what Trump's going to do is a fool's errand.
Now, Ray, I haven't used or heard the word isosceles since 10th grade geometry. I'll work on it.
Yep,
But
please do.
as you were saying that, I thought isosceles. What kind of triangles? But I'm very pleased you used the term bloody nose because I've thought for years, what's going to turn America? It just needs a big bloody nose, nothing short, and maybe this is it.
No, but after the bloody nose comes what Ray raised before,
The
possibility
nuclear
that,
thing?
yes, an empire regional project of Israel. They're going all out for it now. They've done it in Gaza first, and now they're going to try to take Iran because they knew they had the sap in the White House to do it. Because every president before that, and Netanyahu the other day said an incredible thing. I've been trying to do this for 40 years. He admitted it. This is it, because I never had a fool enough in Washington to go along with this
Yeah,
harebrained, incredibly dangerous scheme. Even Biden and all the rest of them, as much as they love Israel, and every Western politician is fighting each other. So who loves Israel more and who hates Russia more? That's the path to success for a politician, really. But they stopped Netanyahu. They knew the consequences. This was game planned out for 40 years. And what we're seeing right now, Ray, in the world is exactly what they feared, right? The American bases would be hit, Israel will be hit, oil prices will go through the roof, they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. Everything we heard about is unfolding right now. And I have to pinch myself to realize this nightmare is really happening, that somebody stupid enough in the White House did it.
Let me just add a word that has not been pronounced, unfortunately, and that's Epstein.
Who?
Epstein. I
Oh
forget
yeah,
his first
I
name.
heard of
I
that
think
guy. Yeah.
Patrick Epstein. No, something else Epstein. Jeffrey. Yeah. Okay. Now, on the Judge's show 4 months ago, I said, this is crazy, but I think even Trump doesn't really want to be a sponsor, enabler of genocide and forced starvation. Okay. There must be something else working on him to have him give 1,000% support to Netanyahu. And I said it was Epstein, might be Epstein. And that was a reach. Now it's no longer a reach. We
right.
know some of the stuff that has been suppressed. And, together with all that other briefing stuff that Netanyahu brought to Mar-a-Lago on the 29th of December last year. I'm sure he had a little notebook, with some photos and stuff. And I'm pretty sure he said, now, Mr. President, just to remind you, uh, if it gets out of hand with this Epstein thing, and it looks like there are people really hell-bent and embarrassing you, we have the real photos, and we can sort of, well, I mean, we'll just saying, Mr. President, just saying. So, is that true? Who's to know? But there's got to be some, it seemed to me there had to be some extra element that made Trump so irascible and so nervous and so psychotic that he would embark or he
The,
would allow himself
Ari
to get.
Ari Ben Menashe, who would know, was very high up working under Ehud Barak with the military intelligence in Israel, said that this is what he believed was going to happen. And this is before the war began. He told us that a few weeks ago, that obviously Israel has the unredacted Epstein files, whether they got it directly from Epstein himself or they've hacked it to get it, and they can let Mr. Trump know what they could reveal if he doesn't go along with this project. And I do
Yeah,
think that that's absolutely a real strong possibility that is
yeah.
what
And
this
happened.
this theory has a lot of currency in our household here, that's for sure. Because there's some as Ray was implying, there's some missing piece here, okay, there's the Adelson money and so on, right? All right, APAC, but it doesn't explain everything. And there is a certain logic. We're again in the zone of surmise, but it's an awfully compelling case.
I think there's a thing missing from Trump's brain. And take a look at the way he announced this war. When he came out with that golfing hat, it looks like he just stepped off the golf course. He went up to this darkened studio in Mar-a-Lago, and he did not seem very enthusiastic about it. It looked
No,
like he was kicking and screaming into this war. That's what it looked like to me.
that goes to my earlier point. He's a spectator here.
That's right.
This is performance art.
Let me
He's
pick up
performing
on
the presidency.
pick up on Ari Ben Menashe. He was one of your predecessor's sources,
I know.
Ari, about the October surprise and about other things. He was proved to be not only connected and, with access, but he was proved to be reliable. And he actually was proved to be somewhat human. So 4 months ago, when he went on with Afsin Ratanzi in that underground thing,
Right.
you need to go back and look at that because he says, look, yeah, I was a handler for her, her father,
Robert Maxwell.
yeah, Robert Maxwell. And I know it, and he says, I was the case officer there, and I know, and I just say to Mr. Trump, look, Mr. Trump, get it off your back. Just do it, and you'll feel better for it in the long run. And it would stop this genocide. I feel real strongly about this. Please, Mr. Trump, just do it. It's gonna just get done. I'm looking at that. I'm saying, my God, this is no slouch. This is a relatively senior member of Mossad who was working with the military intelligence as well.
No, he wasn't Mossad. He was never Mossad.
With Ehud.
Just
With
Amman,
Ehud Barak, yeah, Ehud Barak was with yeah. So it all. I'm glad that you both agree with me and don't call me a conspiracy theorist. But I think this is an extra element. If it's been there all along, I suspect it has. But it's sure there now. And my God, if I were in the Kremlin or in Beijing, I'd be wondering what that might lead this very mercurial, very unpredictable chief of state to do next in Iran or elsewhere.
So if the Israelis run out of interceptors and Iran has an open field, hit whatever they want, basically, they could pull out their hypersonics. If they have enough ballistic missiles, they can do it with that. How does Israel respond? That's the big question. How do they respond if they are existentially threatened? And this is the whole thing in a weird, paranoid, crazy, I think, holdover from the Holocaust, this fear that Netanyahu and his people have been pumping into the Israeli people for years, that they're out to get us again. Well, now they actually would be faced not by this fantasy of existential threat, but a real one. How do they respond? Do they wheel out from, it's not in Dimona, which is Iran is threatened to hit, by the way, Dimona. That's where they create the plutonium and maybe fit the warheads with the fissile material, but they're stored apparently in a base west of Jerusalem, the warheads. We don't really know because they don't even admit they have them.
Well, they're in the submarines too.
They're in submarines. Israeli have submarines. Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. So do they use them? I have to say they're going to bloody use them. These people are crazy.
This goes back to Golda Meir was once asked, would you use, if you had a nuclear weapon, would you use it if the Israeli state were under serious threat? And she said, without hesitation. Now, closer to our moment, I heard the other day that, we all three know Netanyahu says a considerable number of things in Hebrew he would not say in English, right? He's got his crazy cabinet to keep happy and so forth, right? he remarked the other day, I don't know the context. It was in one of the Israeli papers. Uh, Speaking in Hebrew, he said, look, uh, if things get critical around here, the Iranians will get a surprise. We have a surprise for the Iranians that they have never seen before. That's code. Maybe Ray wants to elaborate on this, but my answer is that's what we're looking at.
And Trump won't be able to stop him and maybe even join in. What do you think?
There's no stopping
Well,
these people.
what I think is that I feel affirmed. No, I mean, I've been worried about this openly and vocally oh, for the last 7.5 days, because I do feel that it's going to end up this way with Israel being almost destroyed. And I do feel, and I'm not happy, but I'm gratified to hear that you guys have a similarly gloomy outlook on this thing. So that's why, if the Russians can mediate this thing, or if somebody can put the tap on this thing and well, anyhow, what reminds me about 1973, where Golda Meir did say precisely what Patrick Lawrence has just said. It sent Kissinger on the Hershey Highway. I mean, that's what we say in the Bronx. He was out of his gourd. He ran over and he was traveling all over. And he tried, no, 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 look, look. And you know what he did? He said, all right, you guys were attacked this time, not like 67. And you guys, there's no problem with you handle this, but how about let's have a mutual defense treaty so that the Arabs will never think about attacking you again. And you know what the Israelis said? I know people who are involved in this. I know people from the operations part of our agency that went to places like high-level Saudi leaders and others to broach this thing. How would this be? And the Israelis said, mutual defense treaty? And they said, oh, isn't that sweet? Thanks, but no thanks. My God, now what country in its right mind would refuse a mutual defense treaty with the most powerful nation, at least in those days, in the world? Well, you see, a mutual defense treaty really requires internationally recognized borders. Bummer.
Oh, yeah.
It also
Hmm.
requires on the part of each party, if they want to take off after another country, sort of a an obligation to say, well, look, next Thursday we're going to go bomb the hell out of Damascus, and the Israelis have made it clear in their history that they much prefer, to seek penance later rather than warn people before. So that's what happened, actually. The Israelis refused to have this mutual defense treaty, and that speaks volumes because they don't think they need it. And that goes in spades now in a more jocular way. In those days, people were talking, well, let's make Israel the 51st state. And the objection came from AIPAC right away. No, 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 nothing doing. Why not? Because then they'd only have two senators.
Right.
Sorry about that, guys.
That's great.
Good
That's a
old
wonderful
joke.
joke.
Appropriate to bring it back, Ray. But let's look at it this way, though. Let's look at that scenario where Israel's depleted the interceptors and the U.S. don't have any more, and Iran has an open field. At that point, to avoid that reaction from Israel, perhaps Iran could start dictating terms. Okay, we won't destroy everything that's in front of us right now. You're defenseless, Israel. How about the U.S., you lift the sanctions against us? How about you create a one Palestinian state, or at minimum a Palestinian state as a two-state solution, although one state is more realistic, and hopefully that would be what they would want. And you clear out of Lebanon and never attack it again. What about that, Ray? Do you think there's any chance that Iran could, in the driver's seat at that moment, dictate terms?
Hmm.
Well, I think there's an outside chance, and I said this from the outset. The outcome of this whole thing could be from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free, Israel proper having been obliterated. Now, I think maybe that's a 12, 13% chance. But is that a chance that Israel and uh, President Trump wants to take? Uh, is this what's going to end up happening? It's a vision, really, and it's with everything in play, who's to dismiss this possibility? But if the Palestinians come out of this in a much better shape than they were before, and if the genocide, my God, the genocide and forced starvation stops in Gaza, then who knows? Maybe there would be some progress toward a more decent human attitude to those poor people in the Middle East that have been oppressed for so long.
I don't think there's any reforming Israel the way it is. And somebody pointed out the other day, Tom Friedman is always on about this. The problem's not Israel, it's Netanyahu. If only Netanyahu weren't here. Somebody pointed out, wait a minute, he was elected to office by a considerable margin. When he's gone, somebody else like him, that's Israel now. Now I want to ask you, Joe, are you suggesting, or maybe both of you, that if this war goes Iran's way, how to put it, in victory lies defeat? The more successful they are, the more liable they are to a nuclear detonation?
Well, first of all, I didn't give you permission to raise Tom Friedman's name on this program. And second of all, I wondered that. I wondered that, Patrick. Maybe do you let Israel win to avoid getting nuked? I'm
Well,
suggesting rather than
things
let
get
them win, you tell
complicated.
them we won't bomb the crap out of you now that we can. Now that America can't protect you, no one can protect you. But if you do these things, Israel, a Palestinian gets a state. The sanctions are lifted against us. You never go back into Lebanon again, or you get out of Lebanon. I mean, this is what I'm suggesting, that there's a
I don't see it.
yeah,
I just don't see it.
right.
Forgive me, but
So then Iran has to start attacking and obliterating. And by the way, that's a bipartisan word, obliterating. I seem to remember that the nemesis of Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, once talked about obliterating Iran. Didn't she say that way
I
back
think
during the
he did.
campaign? She used that very word. What a word. But she's getting her
Remember,
wish
Joe.
now. She should be happy with Trump right now. She wanted to obliterate. And by the way, I'm afraid there will be obliteration. That attack yesterday in Tehran just seems like revenge attacks right now. If, as what Scott Ritter is saying, they're hitting empty buildings and they're not really destroying very much inside Iran, and they're not hitting the ballistic missiles are hidden deep in the earth, and so are that they have silos that come out of that they are just hitting cities now. I'm afraid they may turn to just rage, to take revenge against civilians, just to obliterate the way Hillary
yeah,
wanted Iran. But the question is, should they let Israel win in order to prevent a nuclear attack? I mean, I think, what is Israel winning? Letting them have the ceasefire that they gave them last June when Israel was running out of missiles. Iran could have kept going. The Wall Street Journal piece I referred to earlier actually says, had there been another barrage, then it would have been really devastating to Israel. And there wasn't. This time, the Iranians
well,
have vowed to continue. That would be the moment when they have to decide whether it's worth risking a nuclear
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
nuclear attack or make a deal at that point. That's what I'm
Well,
suggesting. At the terms of the deal, Iran would have a lot of leverage there.
one, first of all, I don't think the Israelis have any such arrangement in them on any terms. I just don't. Um, uh, uh, the Iranians have said a number of quite interesting things in this past week or so, uh, and or even before the assault began. They have absolutely had enough of life under these constant threats, and they're drawing a line. We are done with it, and we want an enduring settlement. We're not even interested in nonsense ceasefires and all that. It's over, right? It's an important position to state. That's where I come down on this point.
Yeah, I would say that up till now, the Israelis have been implacable. So have the Iranians for the reasons you just stated. But if push comes to shove, and I'm glad, Joe, that you're focusing on this. If Israel loses definitively, we're facing a completely new situation. And if you all feel like I do, that Netanyahu would likely use a nuclear weapon to prevent himself from and Israel from going down completely, then there has to be flexibility. And, without trivializing this thing, I nominate Joe Lauria to be the new ambassador replacing Huckabee in West Jerusalem, Joe, because I think you're the only guy. Maybe you could bring along some other guy from the Bronx, except Witkoff, not Witkoff, some other real person. And I volunteer if you can't find anybody else. Somebody's got to talk sense. Yeah, there used to be like Senator Mitchell, or there'd be some sort of negotiator that would come in and mediate these things. I think the Russians have already shown they're willing to do that. Maybe in the end, they will pull these chestnuts out of the fire. I just don't know.
Don't the Russians have hasn't Putin over the years put a considerable effort into having, I don't know my adjective, but working relations with the Israelis?
Yes, very good relations.
Yeah. And that's a benefit.
That
That
may
means
count.
oh yeah. What are about 2, 3 million Russians
Yeah.
in Israel? I mean, that means something to, Russians abroad.
They demographically saved Israel, the Russian emigration.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting.
Yeah. So that's a plus, a real plus.
Does this impact Ukraine at all? Let me ask you guys, because first of all, Putin has also threatened to pull the plug on any gas going to Europe when they would desperately need it now, because Qatar has shut down production, and whatever's sitting in Qatar, the liquefied natural gas sitting on their ships, can't get through the strait right now. So are they going to have to turn towards Russia? We saw Scott Bessent, who is where'd they get this guy? He comes out of Central Casting. He's trying to look like some Ivy League professor with his glasses, and he's just disgusting. But he was saying that India can now buy Russian oil. That's a whole other story. Before, by the way, on this trade deal that Trump concluded, the Indians never announced that they were going to not buy Indian oil, Russian oil, and the Russian Lavrov said we never heard this from the Indians. But it was Trump kept saying they agreed to. But now India is allowed to buy Russian oil, and they may lift other sanctions against Russia. This is quite interesting. And the Europeans may need to go to Russia to survive because of the situation right now. What is Putin? Let me ask you, Ray, first. What Putin is there in the driver's seat right now? What does he do? Can he get concessions on Ukraine by gas blackmail of Russia, of the Europeans, rather?
Well, the Hungarians and the rest of the EU are at each other's throats right now. Um, the Hungarians and the Slovakia have been deprived of the energy, the oil that they deserve or contracted for. And most important, Putin raised this himself. Now, he had that 2 days ago, Zarubin, his favorite interviewer. Okay, ask me regular questions for the first 2 minutes, and then ask me about the gas stuff. And he said spontaneously, "Well, we could suspend gas deliveries to Europe." Well, what would that mean? We could do that. Well, I mean, you don't have to be an expert in esoteric communications to realize what that means. And as you point out, Joe, I mean, winter's not over. Gas prices are already doubled in places like Germany. If there's no natural gas coming from Qatar, where's it coming from? Well, the U.S. will try to, but can't do that. Okay, so yeah, there's leverage there. And, this is one of the moving parts that the Russians can play because to their benefit, they are enriched with all these natural resources. which now mean a hell of a lot given the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is blocked.
Yeah. You know, I think the Europeans, I think the situation we're describing now is suddenly quite dynamic. Okay. The Europeans, I think, are in quite serious trouble. Let me explain for a second. There are many ways prices can rise. Prices can rise on steel, rubber, potatoes. But when prices rise on energy, everything rises. Onions, typing paper, everything rises. So you're in a, a sudden inflationary spiral. What does that mean? That means the central banks, the Fed is already talking about this, and the European Central Bank, the ECB, is going to do the same thing. They are going to have to bump rates up in order to control inflation. And inflation, I think, is rolling at the Europeans like a big black bowling ball, right? And when you raise interest rates to uh, to control inflation, you're suppressing growth. So and European growth is anemic to begin with, right? The Germany has completely punted the best economy in Europe, right? Uh, and so I think what the Europeans, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they are in serious trouble on the energy side. And I think it could cause some movement um, by way of uh, by way of their relations with Russia. I don't know who would control these decisions, Washington or Berlin or whomever. But if Washington is already shrugging and saying, "Well, the Indians can buy Russian oil," how far are we from some dispensation of that kind with the Europeans? It's a serious, when energy goes up, everything else does, and the Europeans can't handle that for very long.
Merz, Friedrich Merz, our lovely Chancellor of Germany, said, quote, "A prolonged continuation of this war would not be in our interests. Same applies to the possible collapse of the Iranian state or proxy conflicts for Iranian soil." So the Europeans are trying to do this dance where they are sucking up to Trump. They have to. They are the vassal, but they are realizing that this war was not legal and they don't want to be involved in it because of the dire consequences. So I don't know where the Europeans stand, but as far as the U.S. Liquefied natural gas, I understand it's too expensive and they don't have the terminals in Europe to turn it back into
Yeah,
gas when it arrives from the U.S.,
yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Whereas the pipelines to Russia, at least some of them still exist. They can get the gas piped in. They don't need to liquefy it. Isn't that right? Right? And it's much
Most of
cheaper.
them are still, apart from Nord Stream, most of them are still there,
Yeah.
empty, but still there,
I
right?
think Putin could say, you stop arming Ukraine. We're going to sign that treaty, the one that we put forward on December 2021 with NATO
Yes,
and with the United States. We're going to have a new
yeah,
security architecture in Europe right now, or I'm going to tell Iran to bomb the shit out of of Israel, and we're going to, and then this is the moment. I think he could play that to his advantage. What do you think, Ray? Yeah.
everything is dynamic now. I think all these situations. Yeah, yeah.
I think he's already started to play that card by making that overture. He is in a very, very strong position. He doesn't need any help winning on the battlefield, but I think he still believes that he needs cooperation from the United States to get the kind of security arrangement in Europe that will prevent this from happening again. That's the only reason I think that he's been wasting his time with Witkoff and with Jared Kushner. But I think his overall wish to have a decent relationship with the United States really pertains mostly to the Ukraine problem, where if NATO is falling apart, which it is, its main member will remember to say, well, look, we're willing to make a deal here, or we're willing to make a deal.
Ray, you used before one of the most common and old idioms that you can imagine to explain, I think, the essence of what we've been talking about. They bit off more than they can chew, Israel and the United States. And this is the consequences. Now, they didn't game plan this. They didn't see the consequences, what it would do for Russia and Europe. I think the Europeans understood this, the mess they're going to be put into by this war, but they weren't actually consulted, it doesn't seem like, right? This is a Netanyahu game, and he got a jerk in the White House and a macho lunatic at the Pentagon to do this war, and it's not going to end well for them, it looks like, as we're seeing right now. And this is the situation we're in after this week, and the entire world is being affected.
Yeah, yeah. Now,
And
Ray,
Spain is acting like a real nation.
Fantastic.
yeah, I was going to say, of all the Europeans, the Spanish, Sanchez is kind of a middle of the road socialist. He's done some good things and some bad things, but he's right on the page by way of this situation in Iran. And I've been watching the last few days a couple of Spanish parliamentarians, both of them women. I don't know. I can't tell if they're in the Madrid Parliament or in their Strasbourg member European Parliament, but they're out there saying Spain must leave NATO. Spain cannot take part in this. It's not so far-fetched. De Gaulle did it in '66, right? Ray will remember that, right? So Spain is, makes the rest of the Europeans look like I can't think of the word, right? Fill in the blank, right? Look pitiful. And he's willing to pay the price with Trump. He's toe to toe with Trump these days, right? I think Trump threatened to cut off all trade with Spain. Well, Trump says these things, but he's Sanchez is taking on a difficult situation for the right reasons, and he makes the Brits and French and Germans look pitiful by comparison, Sorry, I got all upset. I got all excited about Spain because I've been following this the last few days, right?
Interesting.
Well, I want to say that I'm worried about one thing, that Iran is America's Carthage. And Lindsey Graham is Cato the Elder, who kept ending all of his speeches with, "We have to destroy Carthage." And this for Rome was they had to destroy. This is the way Netanyahu and people like Lindsey Graham and his former sidekick, John McCain, who once sang "Bomb, Bomb, 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 Iran" to the Beach Boys song, if you remember that. This is something they've been wanting to do for decades, like Netanyahu admitted. Destroy Iran. I fear that this is what we're going to see. And that the menacing words this morning of Donald Trump about death and destruction, and Hegseth's absolutely insane talk.
Hegseth is worse than
Yeah,
Trump on
that
this
but they're going to back it up.
rhetoric.
You see, I thought he
Yeah.
was just some macho guy with tattoos and pumping foam, but he's actually a madman. Who's doing things now. They're following through. They're acting. This is the scary part. So I fear that they're going to just try to really obliterate. And Hillary Clinton will be there with the pom-poms, obliterate Iran,
Joe,
like they destroyed Carthage.
I have to stop you again. Do you seriously think Pete Hegseth runs the Pentagon?
No,
He's performing defense secretary, right? He doesn't run a bloody thing.
No, Defense Minister Katz does, I guess. I don't know, but
The generals in the deep state.
this is Netanyahu's war. There were people in the deep state who put out, and to go back to the beginning of our program, there were people in the deep state who put out this report saying, don't do it. That even a major U.S. war is not going to overthrow the government in Iran. Forget it. So I fear that rather than take a loss, they're going to continue to pummel. Now, they may run out of the interceptors, but I don't know about the offensive weapons. They may have more of those.
I think we should end on Ray's encouraging note. The Iranians are hanging in and they're very far from done. This is going in their this it's very likely, I can't go any further than that. It's very likely, or it's very possible that this is going in Iran's favor now.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's a question of Carthage, delenda ist, or Iran, or Israel, delenda est. Which one of them is going to be destroyed? I see some solace in the notion that the Iranians have been showing themselves to be more perspicacious than the Israelis. And so there is a chance before the end state where Israel is being completely destroyed, that, as you suggest, Joe, something artful like a ceasefire or a kind of a pause, which says, look, here we are. You didn't succeed in delendaing us, Iranians. We don't want to delenda you, Israel. Let's see if we can't work something out before something really, really bad happens. I think the Russians would help arbitrate that. There are maybe the Indians, for God's sake. You know, the Indians are pretty close to the Israelis, I gather, given Modi's recent visit. So there are all kinds of possibilities, but I think the tone of this conversation has been appropriate. My God, what's going to happen, and could it be the worst?
Thank you, Ray McGovern, for speaking with us tonight, and Patrick Lawrence. We'll end it there, and we'll regroup and see what the next week will bring. This last week was like 100 years of history, and we have another week coming up, so let's see. For Consortium News, for Cathy Vogan, our producer, for our audience, who I thank, this is Joe Lauria for CN Live and Consortium News, saying goodbye for this week. I'm forgetting the name of the program, but good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.